The small restaurant sat quietly at the corner of the street, glowing warmly against the cool evening rain. The streets outside were slick and wet, reflecting the soft orange glow of the street lamps. People hurried by, umbrellas bobbing in the wind, and cars passed slowly, sending thin streams of water skimming along the curbs. Inside, the restaurant felt like another world. The soft hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the faint aroma of fresh bread and simmering sauces created a cozy atmosphere that made anyone feel safe and at home. Among the few waiters and waitresses bustling around, one young woman moved with quiet efficiency. She carried trays of steaming food and glasses of water, smiling politely at every table. Yet her eyes held a distant look, as if she were thinking about something far away. She had worked here for years, and everyone knew her as reliable, friendly, and hardworking. Yet nobody knew the secret she kept hidden beneath her calm exterior. Nobody knew that beneath that apron and that smile, her hands held magic. Magic that had only ever belonged to her and her piano. The restaurant had a piano tucked into a corner, a grand instrument that had been there since the owner opened the place years ago. It was polished and gleaming, but it remained mostly untouched. Occasionally, the owner allowed someone to play during special evenings, but the young waitress had never been invited. Still, she had learned to imagine the music in her mind while she worked. Often, when the restaurant was empty, she would slip a finger over the keys, tracing melodies she had heard as a child. She remembered the first time she had touched a piano as if it had been yesterday. Her tiny fingers had stumbled over the keys, but even then, she had felt the power of sound, the way it could fill a room and touch hearts. Tonight, the restaurant was busier than usual. A small group of important guests had reserved the best table. They were people who knew the world of music, art, and business, the kind of people who could change careers with a single word. The young waitress had noticed them when they walked in. Sharp suits, quiet confidence, and eyes that seemed to notice everything. She felt a flicker of nervousness. She moved among the tables with care, pouring wine and serving dishes, but her mind kept wandering to the piano. The rain outside tapped against the windows in a rhythm that almost matched the pulse in her chest. The evening wore on. Guests chatted politely, the clatter of cutlery mixed with soft laughter, and the waitress went from table to table, refilling water glasses and taking orders. Each time she passed the piano, her heart gave a small leap. She glanced at it, imagining her hands dancing over the keys, the notes floating across the room. She thought of the melodies she had kept locked inside herself for years. She had never played for anyone like this before. She had never dared. As she moved past the piano for the third time that evening, the low hum of conversation seemed to fade. One of the guests, an older man with gray hair and a warm smile, noticed her glance at the instrument. He said softly, "You play, don't you?" The young waitress froze, caught off guard. She smiled politely and shook her head, pretending to busy herself with a tray of glasses. "Just a little," she replied, her voice steady, but inside her chest her heart was hammering. Just a little. It sounded modest, almost like a lie. Because in truth she could play so much more. She could play pieces that would make grown men pause mid-conversation. But that part of her life had always been private, hidden beneath her work uniform and polite demeanor. The older man's eyes twinkled, and he leaned back in his chair. "Music is a gift," he said. "Even a little bit is worth sharing." She nodded, murmuring thanks, and moved away. But his words lingered in her mind. Even a little bit is worth sharing. She felt a warmth in her chest, a small spark of courage. Maybe, just maybe, tonight could be different. Maybe tonight she could let her music be heard. As the evening deepened, the restaurant grew warmer, filled with the chatter of patrons and the soft clinking of dishes. The young waitress moved carefully among the tables, delivering food and clearing plates. She noticed the way the rain outside had slowed to a gentle drizzle, the way the street lamps glimmered on the wet pavement. Her mind kept returning to the piano. She thought of the first simple tune she could play without hesitation. A tune she had practiced countless times in secret. A tune that could fill the room without drawing attention to herself. Finally, as the guests were finishing their main courses, she made a decision. With a quick glance toward the owner, who was busy talking to the kitchen staff, she stepped lightly to the piano. The polished wood felt smooth under her hands. She paused, letting her fingers hover just above the keys, feeling the coolness and weight of the instrument. She took a deep breath, letting the nervous energy in her chest settle into focus. She pressed a single key and the sound rang out clearly. Then she began to play. The tune was simple at first, a melody that most people would recognize but think nothing of. It was soft, gentle, almost like a whisper. Patrons looked up from their conversations, some with mild curiosity, some with polite interest. Nobody expected much. The young waitress kept her eyes on the keys, letting her fingers move naturally, finding comfort in the rhythm she had known all her life. But something started to happen. The simple melody began to grow. She added little variations, subtle shifts in timing, gentle rises and falls that made the tune feel alive. Her fingers danced across the keys with a quiet confidence, each note deliberate yet flowing. A few guests paused their conversation, listening more closely, noticing the delicate touch, the emotion hidden in each chord. Even the older man who had noticed her earlier leaned forward, a smile forming on his face. He could tell immediately that she was more than capable. There was depth in her playing, a hint of mastery that was rare to find in someone so young. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. The music was speaking for her, telling the story she had kept to herself for so long. Memories of childhood lessons, of stolen moments practicing when nobody was watching, of the sheer joy she felt when she first discovered she could make the piano sing, all filled her heart. The melody was no longer just a simple tune. It was her voice, clear and honest, reaching across the room to touch everyone who listened. The restaurant seemed to change around her. The usual hum of conversation softened. Glasses stopped clinking. Even the rain outside seemed to quiet, as if the world itself had paused to listen. Patrons who had been absorbed in their meals or their phones now leaned back in their chairs, drawn in by the unexpected beauty of the music. It was gentle yet powerful, simple yet full of feeling. Each note carried a piece of her soul, a story of patience, hope, and quiet perseverance. For the first time that evening, the young waitress felt something she had not felt in a long time, the thrill of being truly seen. She had always been invisible in this place, just another worker moving between tables. But now through the piano she was visible in a way she had never imagined. She could feel the subtle shift in the room, the way people were drawn to the sound, the way the melody seemed to settle into their hearts. As the last notes of the simple tune lingered in the air, the young waitress allowed herself a small private smile. She had played only a beginning, a hint of what she could do. The guests had listened politely, but for some there was a flicker of recognition in their eyes, a spark of curiosity about what might come next. And in that moment she realized something important. Tonight was just the start. This was the first step in letting her music touch the world beyond the quiet confines of the restaurant. She rose from the piano, her hands lingering just above the keys, savoring the warmth of the instrument and the quiet magic of the moment. She returned to her duties, pouring wine and clearing dishes, but her steps felt lighter, more confident. Inside, she knew that something had shifted, not just in the room but in herself. She had taken a small risk, shared a little piece of her gift, and it had been enough to make a difference. As she moved among the tables, she caught snippets of conversation. Patrons were speaking in softer tones, some glancing toward the piano with curiosity, others simply smiling to themselves. Even the older man nodded in quiet approval. She had played a simple tune, yes, but it had carried a message. That beauty could appear in the most unexpected places, that talent could shine even when hidden, and that sometimes the smallest actions could create ripples that reached far beyond their origin. The rain outside had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the soft light of the lamps. The young waitress paused for a moment at the door, looking out at the wet pavement. She felt a gentle thrill of anticipation, a quiet excitement for what might come next. She didn't yet know how far this night could go, but she knew one thing clearly. The music inside her was alive, waiting for the chance to grow, waiting to transform not just the evening, but perhaps her life as well. With a deep breath and a quiet smile, she returned to her work, the faint echo of her piano notes lingering in the air, touching every corner of the restaurant, and settling softly in the hearts of all who had heard them. After the soft tune had drifted into silence, the restaurant returned slowly to its usual rhythm. Plates clinked against each other, glasses were refilled, and conversations resumed, though now a little quieter than before. The young waitress moved among the tables, her steps lighter than before, but her heart was still racing. She could feel the strange electricity in the room, the way people were now looking at her differently, though none had yet spoken about the music she had played. She refilled a water glass for a man sitting alone at a corner table. He had been listening intently, eyes closed as if savoring each note, and now he gave her a small smile. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. She smiled politely, brushing off the compliment with a simple, "Thank you." Inside, though, her chest swelled with a mixture of pride and nervousness. She had never received praise like that in her life. The older man who had noticed her earlier now leaned forward in his chair, stroking his chin thoughtfully. He had a way of looking at people that made them feel both seen and measured at the same time. "You have a gift," he said to her quietly as she passed by. "Most people never understand what they have until it's too late. Don't let it go unnoticed." The young waitress nodded, feeling the weight of his words. They were gentle, almost a whisper, but they carried more encouragement than she had ever received from anyone. She returned to her work, delivering desserts and clearing dishes, but she could feel her mind still on the piano, still alive with the memory of the notes she had played. Across the restaurant, a small group of the important guests had begun to discuss her performance in low tones. One of them, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a careful posture, leaned toward the others. "Did you notice her touch? There's something unusual there," she said softly. The others nodded, whispering among themselves, clearly intrigued. The young waitress moved between the tables, carefully balancing a tray of glasses, trying not to let her nervousness show. She could sense that a few people were watching her closely now. It was a strange feeling. For years she had blended into the background, unnoticed and underestimated, but tonight it was different. She felt as if invisible threads were stretching from her hands to the eyes of the guests, connecting them through the music they had just heard. The restaurant owner, who had been busy in the kitchen, now appeared near the piano, wiping his hands on a towel. He looked at her, then at the guests, and finally back at her again. His expression was a mix of surprise and curiosity. "You played that?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. The young waitress nodded, her cheeks warming slightly. "Just a little," she said, her tone humble. But the owner's eyes did not reflect doubt. They reflected amazement. "You've been hiding that talent," he said, shaking his head slightly. "Right here in front of me all this time." His words were not accusatory, but they carried a weight of wonder, as if he could hardly believe that someone so ordinary-looking could hold such extraordinary skill. The young waitress swallowed, feeling a mixture of embarrassment and pride. She had always kept her playing a secret, not wanting to draw attention to herself. She had feared judgment, rejection, and failure. But now, with the room filled with listeners who had actually noticed her, she felt a spark of something new. Possibility. A waiter passed by with a fresh tray of drinks, but he also slowed down, glancing toward the piano and then at her. He gave a small, impressed nod before moving on. Even among her colleagues, there was a shift. For the first time, she sensed that they were not just seeing her as a co-worker, but as someone remarkable, someone capable of extraordinary things. The older man, noticing the attention she was receiving, smiled gently. "Music is different from everything else," he said to her, as if sharing a secret. "It has a way of telling the truth about a person, and tonight, you told the truth beautifully." Her chest swelled with a quiet emotion she had not expected. She felt tears threatening to rise, but she blinked them away, focusing instead on the task at hand. She moved to the next table, smiling and pouring tea. But the music she had played continued to linger in her mind. Every note, every pause, every subtle variation had become part of the room now, like a soft shadow that followed her. Meanwhile, the group of important guests was talking quietly, but intensely. One man, younger than the rest, with a keen look in his eyes, leaned back and said, "There's something deliberate in her playing. It's not just talent, it's understanding. Technique without heart is easy, but she has both." The others nodded. "Yes," another said. "And the way she adds small variations, she knows exactly how to touch the listener. That is rare, even in professional musicians." Hearing this, the young waitress felt her pulse quicken. They were talking about her, really talking about her. Not about the food, not about the service, not about small pleasantries. They were talking about her music. She had always dreamed of recognition, but never like this. She had always imagined performing in a concert hall or a quiet studio, not in a small restaurant where the guests had come for dinner and a polite tune. And yet here it was. Validation, unexpected but real. For a moment she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to play for more than just herself. What would it feel like to fill a room with her music, to watch people's faces change as they listened, to know that she could touch hearts and minds simply through the keys of a piano? The thought made her hands tingle, even as she carried trays and wiped tables. The older man noticed the look on her face and said softly, "Don't stop now. Let them hear more. You have something worth sharing." His encouragement lingered, wrapping around her like a warm blanket. She had always doubted herself, always wondered if her talent was enough, if her playing was meaningful. But tonight those doubts seemed smaller, almost laughable in comparison to the truth she now felt. She could play, she could reach people, and they were ready to listen. Across the room, one of the critics who had been quietly observing finally spoke up. "That young woman at the piano," he said, voice low but firm. "She has an uncommon gift. I've listened to many performers in my life, but there is something different about her touch, her timing, her feel for the music. She's remarkable." A murmur of agreement spread through the table of guests. The young waitress passing by at that moment caught the words. Her heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to keep moving, to appear calm and collected. Inside, however, a storm of excitement, nervousness, and anticipation was building. She had never been noticed like this, never in her life. As the evening continued, she began to see subtle changes in how people interacted with her. Patrons who had been busy eating now leaned toward the piano, listening to the faint echoes she left behind as she walked past. Some smiled knowingly, as if they could sense the music lingering in the air. Even her co-workers seemed a little more aware, glancing at her with new respect, not because she served well, but because she had a talent that could not be ignored. A young man at a nearby table, perhaps in his 20s, asked politely, "Would you play something else?" His voice was tentative, not demanding, but filled with hope. The young waitress paused, caught off guard. She had only played a small tune, and now someone wanted more. The request made her heart pound. She had never performed for strangers, never in a room full of discerning eyes and ears, but she also felt a thrill of possibility. She looked at the piano, its polished surface gleaming under the warm lights. Her fingers tingled as they hovered above the keys. She thought about the music she had practiced in secret, the pieces she had dreamed of playing when nobody was watching, and for the first time, she considered the idea that maybe, just maybe, she could rise to the moment. The older man gave her an encouraging nod, a quiet signal that she had permission to take this risk. She took a deep breath, letting her mind calm, letting her fingers remember the movements they had practiced so many times before. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath with her, waiting for the next sound, the next melody, the next spark of magic that might emerge from her hands. And as she sat down at the piano once more, she realized something extraordinary. She was no longer just the waitress who served food and cleared tables. She was a musician, a storyteller, a creator of beauty. For the first time in her life, she felt fully herself, fully seen and fully alive. The first notes of the next melody trembled in the air, soft but deliberate. And in that moment, the room shifted. Patrons leaned forward. Conversations fell silent, and even the rain outside seemed to pause, as if the world itself had recognized that something remarkable was about to happen. The young waitress lowered herself onto the piano bench, feeling the smooth wood beneath her. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting her hands hover just above the keys. The first notes she had played earlier still lingered in the room, a soft echo that seemed to encourage her. Her heart was pounding, but not with fear alone. There was excitement too, a thrilling sense that this moment could change everything. She had never played for anyone like this, with people really listening, and now they wanted more. She opened her eyes and looked around the room. The guests had quieted, their attention fully on her. Some leaned slightly forward in their chairs, others rested their elbows on the table, hands clasped together as if holding their breath. Even her co-workers had stopped moving for a moment, pausing in mid-step to watch. The air was thick with expectation. One of the guests, a man with a sharp, analytical gaze, spoke before she could begin. "I hope you don't mind a little challenge," he said, smiling faintly. "That last tune was charming, but we're curious if you can play something more sophisticated, something that truly shows your skill." The words struck her like a sudden gust of wind. She had played a simple tune, something safe and familiar, and now they wanted more. Her first instinct was to shake her head, to say that she couldn't. After all, she had never performed under pressure like this. But then she remembered the older man's encouragement, the quiet belief in her talent. And deep inside, she felt a spark of courage. Maybe she could do this. She nodded slowly. "I'll try," she said, her voice calm even though her heart was racing. The guests exchanged approving glances. Their curiosity piqued. The critic at the far table leaned forward slightly, folding his hands together. "Take your time," he said. "We'll be listening." The young waitress took a deep breath, letting her shoulders relax. She allowed her mind to settle, remembering all the years she had spent practicing, learning, and imagining herself performing. She thought of the pieces she had memorized in secret, the hours spent tracing finger patterns on the keys, the late nights when the house was silent and she was alone with her music. All that preparation had led to this moment. She could feel the years of quiet practice supporting her, like invisible hands guiding her fingers. Her hands finally touched the keys. The first notes were soft, deliberate, almost hesitant. She allowed herself to feel the sound, to listen as the room responded. The melody began simply, like a gentle ripple spreading across still water. But as she continued, she added subtle changes, small pauses, unexpected harmonies, gentle shifts in rhythm. The music began to grow, not just in sound, but in feeling. The guests leaned closer, their expressions changing from curiosity to quiet amazement. The woman with the sharp eyes whispered to her companion, "Listen to the control she has. Every note is intentional." The companion nodded, eyes wide. "Yes, and the emotion? It's extraordinary. You can tell she feels every chord." The young waitress didn't look up. She didn't need to. She was fully immersed in the music, letting it flow through her fingers and into the room. Her mind and body moved as one, her emotions guiding the tempo and dynamics. The notes were no longer just sounds, they were messages, tiny stories that carried hope, longing, and joy. Each chord seemed to reach the listeners in a different way, touching them individually, drawing them into the performance. A few patrons closed their eyes, letting themselves be carried by the music. Some whispered softly to each other, unable to contain their admiration. The critic leaned back in his chair, arms folded, watching silently but with keen interest. He had heard countless performances in his life, but there was something different here, something rare and compelling. The young waitress felt the energy of the room respond to her playing. It was a strange and wonderful sensation. The rhythm of the music seemed to echo the heartbeat of the guests, creating a silent connection that no words could convey. She felt herself becoming part of the space and the space becoming part of her. The restaurant was no longer just a place for dinner. It had transformed into a stage, a vessel for her creativity and expression. Minutes passed, though she did not notice the time. Her fingers moved with confidence now, no longer hesitant but deliberate, commanding the keys with precision. The music swelled and fell, rising to gentle crescendos before softening again like waves on a calm sea. Each transition was smooth, seamless, yet full of subtle surprises that held the listener's attention. The critic finally spoke, softly this time, almost to himself. "Remarkable. She's beyond what I expected." He looked around the table. "Everyone should listen closely. She's telling a story without words, and it's compelling." The young waitress felt a thrill at his words, even though he did not speak them directly to her. The recognition, however quiet, strengthened her confidence. She knew that she had something unique, something worth sharing. And now the room itself seemed to encourage her to go further. She allowed the melody to evolve, shifting from soft and contemplative passages to more complex, technically demanding sequences. Her fingers moved faster now, but with perfect control. She navigated the intricate patterns she had practiced countless times, each movement precise, each note clear. Yet even in the complexity, the music retained its emotional depth. It was not just skill on display, it was feeling, expression, a conversation between her and the listeners. A young woman at one of the tables whispered to her friend, "Do you hear that? It's like the music is alive. Every note, every pause. It's like she's speaking to us." Her friend nodded, eyes wide, captivated by the unfolding performance. Even the restaurant owner standing near the piano was struck silent. He had known she was capable, but he had never imagined this. The quiet confidence, the technical mastery, and the emotional depth all combined to create something extraordinary. He felt a surge of pride and astonishment. For years, she had been just a waitress in his eyes, but now she was something entirely different. a musician capable of holding an entire room in her hands. As the music continued, the young waitress felt a sense of liberation. She had been holding back for years, afraid of judgment, afraid of failing, afraid of not being enough. But now, with every note, she was letting go of those fears. She was playing not to impress, not to prove, but simply to express herself. And in doing so, she discovered a freedom she had never known. The guests were mesmerized. The simple curiosity that had brought them to the piano transformed into deep admiration. Their polite interest evolved into emotional engagement. Some leaned closer, others closed their eyes, and a few even whispered softly, unable to contain their wonder. Every note seemed to touch something within them, stirring feelings that they had long forgotten or never known existed. The young waitress felt the connection between her and the room intensify. She could feel the energy, the anticipation, the awe. The room was no longer separate from her. It was alive with her music, vibrating with the same pulse that had guided her fingers. She was no longer just playing a piece. She was creating an experience, a moment that would linger in the hearts of everyone present. Suddenly she paused, allowing a single note to hang in the air, trembling with resonance. The silence that followed was electric, almost tangible. It was as if the room itself had been holding its breath, waiting for that one note to complete the story. The guests were spellbound, leaning forward, eyes wide, as if afraid to blink. Then she resumed, moving into a new section of the piece, one that was even more challenging. The tempo increased, the patterns more intricate, yet her fingers moved effortlessly. She felt herself becoming part of the music becoming part of her. Each note was deliberate, precise, yet filled with the emotion that had always driven her to play. She was telling a story, unfolding a journey of sound that carried everyone along. The critic finally leaned back, silent but clearly impressed. He had heard many talented performers, but something about this young woman was different. Her playing was not just skillful, it was alive, expressive, and real. It was the kind of performance that lingered in memory long after the notes had faded. The young waitress felt a surge of exhilaration. She had taken the challenge and risen to it, transforming a simple tune into something far greater. She had faced the pressure, the expectation, and her own self-doubt, and she had emerged triumphant. And as she continued to play, she realized something profound. This was only the beginning. The room had shifted, the energy changed. Patrons who had come for a simple dinner were now witnesses to something extraordinary. The young waitress, once invisible and overlooked, had claimed a space that was hers alone. Through the piano, she had revealed herself in a way that words could never capture, and in doing so, she had transformed not only the evening but also her own sense of possibility. The moment she allowed the music to fully take over, the young waitress felt a strange but wonderful sensation in her chest. It was as if every fear, every hesitation, and every doubt had dissolved into the sound of the piano. Her fingers moved faster now, yet effortlessly, as though they had a mind of their own. She had played countless times in quiet, alone in the house or in empty rooms, but never like this. Never in front of an audience that truly mattered. And now, every note she pressed carried the weight of all those secret hours, all the dreams she had kept hidden. The melody began softly, almost tenderly, floating through the restaurant like a gentle breeze. Patrons who had been quietly dining now turned toward the piano, their conversations fading into silence. The woman with the sharp eyes at the guest's table leaned forward, her hands clasped, watching intently. There was a faint gasp from another guest, almost involuntary, as they realized this was no ordinary performance. She allowed the music to grow, each note swelling with emotion, filling the room in a way that demanded attention without force. The soft hum of the piano was no longer just background. It became the heartbeat of the evening, pulling everyone toward it, tying them together in a shared experience. Even the restaurant owner standing nearby felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. He had seen many performers in his time, but none had managed to turn a quiet evening into something extraordinary so effortlessly. Her fingers danced across the keys, moving from delicate, gentle touches to sweeping chords that filled every corner of the room. The complexity of the piece increased, yet every note remained precise, controlled and deeply expressive. She could feel the energy of the room responding to her. Patrons leaned closer, some closing their eyes to fully absorb the music, others simply whispering to themselves, moved by a sound they had never expected to hear in a small restaurant on a rainy evening. The critic at the far table was leaning forward now, eyes bright, hands folded together in anticipation. He had heard many performances in his life, but this was different. There was something alive in her playing, something that could not be taught. Technique alone could never create such a connection. He glanced at the older man who had encouraged her earlier, and their eyes met briefly, both acknowledging the rarity of what they were witnessing. The young waitress allowed herself a deep breath, letting the music flow through her, guiding her rather than the other way around. She had memorized these movements countless times, but tonight was not about memory or repetition. It was about expression. It was about allowing the music to speak for her, to tell her story without words. Each chord she struck carried emotion, longing, hope, joy, and a quiet strength she had never dared to share before. The room seemed to shift with her playing. The soft murmurs and laughter had disappeared entirely, replaced by a focused, almost reverent silence. Even the servers who moved around the tables were careful not to make noise, not wanting to disturb the spell she had cast. Patrons leaned closer to the piano as if they could somehow reach into her music and touch it. Each note seemed to speak directly to them, leaving a mark they would not soon forget. As the piece progressed, she began to experiment subtly, weaving in small variations she had never tried before. They were delicate but daring, moments that could easily have gone wrong if her confidence faltered. But she trusted herself. She let intuition guide her fingers, letting the music evolve naturally. The result was mesmerizing. Each note connected seamlessly to the next, forming a story that the audience could feel even if they did not understand the technicalities behind it. A young woman at a nearby table whispered, almost to herself, "It's like she's telling a story that I didn't even know I needed to hear." Her friend nodded, eyes wide, caught in the spell. Across the room, another patron whispered, "I've never heard anything like this in my life. She's incredible." The young waitress did not see them, but she felt it. She felt the attention, the quiet awe, and the way the room had become something more than a place for food and conversation. It was a space of magic, a moment suspended in time where every person present was connected by the music she created. For the first time, she understood the power of her gift, not just as a skill, but as a force that could touch hearts. The older man who had encouraged her earlier watched silently, a small, satisfied smile on his face. He could see how fully she had claimed this moment, how completely she had allowed her music to breathe. He knew that talent like this was rare, and watching her perform was like witnessing something miraculous unfold in front of him. The crescendo of the piece approached, and the young waitress felt a surge of emotion course through her. She pushed her hands further across the keys, letting the sound swell and echo. The music became richer, fuller, more complex. Every note resonated in the room, vibrating through the walls, through the tables, through the very hearts of everyone present. Patrons leaned forward, some clasping their hands to their chests, as if to hold on to the emotion that washed over them. The critic, who had been silent, finally let out a small exhale, a sound of awe and approval. "Extraordinary," he whispered to himself. "She is extraordinary." He scribbled something quickly into his notebook, but his eyes never left the piano. Every movement of her hands, every rise and fall of the melody, held him captive. The music shifted again, moving into a softer, more delicate section. The young waitress allowed the notes to float gently, like a stream of light across the room. Patrons closed their eyes, letting themselves be carried by the sound, some swaying ever so slightly in their chairs. Even the restaurant owner, usually practical and reserved, felt a lump in his throat, moved by the unexpected beauty he had witnessed unfold before him. She let the music linger for a moment, allowing a single note to resonate fully. It hung in the air, trembling slightly before fading into silence. And then, almost imperceptibly, she began to build again, this time with more confidence, more power. The room responded instantly, as if it were alive, vibrating with the energy of the performance. Each chord she struck added depth and emotion, and the piece soared, filling the restaurant with a sound that was at once tender and breathtakingly powerful. Patrons could no longer sit still. Some had stood, leaning on their chairs, completely absorbed. Others whispered to each other, trying to share their awe without disturbing the flow of music. The young waitress felt the energy of the room merge with her own, creating a connection she had never imagined possible. She was no longer just performing. She was communicating, reaching, touching, As the piece reached its peak, her hands moved with flawless precision. The notes flowed seamlessly, each one a thread in a tapestry of sound that wrapped around the listeners' hearts. The rhythm pulsed with intensity, rising and falling like waves on the shore. Patrons held their breath, caught in the spell of the music. Even the rain outside, which had begun again quietly against the windows, seemed to blend with the sound, as if nature itself were harmonizing with her playing. When the final notes lingered and slowly faded, there was a moment of stunned silence. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The room held its breath, suspended in the beauty that had just passed through it. And then slowly applause began. A few hands clapped softly at first, hesitant, as if unsure they were allowed to break the spell. Then more joined in, louder and louder, until the entire room was clapping and cheering, rising to their feet in awe. The young waitress sat for a moment, hand still on the keys, feeling a rush of disbelief and joy. She had done it. She had taken a simple challenge and transformed it into something extraordinary. The room had changed, the energy had shifted, and for the first time she felt truly recognized, truly seen, not just as a waitress, but as an artist, as a musician, as someone who had the power to move people. The older man who had encouraged her earlier approached quietly, clapping softly, his eyes filled with pride. "You did it," he said simply. "You've shown them and yourself exactly who you are." The young waitress finally rose from the piano, a soft smile on her face, her heart still racing. She looked around the room, taking in the faces of the patrons. Some were teary-eyed, some were smiling in wonder, and some simply stared, lost in the memory of the music. Even the critic had a small, approving smile on his face, notebook closed, fully absorbed in what he had just witnessed. For the first time, she felt a quiet certainty in her chest. She had taken a risk, shared her gift, and it had been more than enough. She had transformed the evening, and in doing so, she had transformed herself. She had proven, not just to the guests, but to herself, that her music could reach out, touch hearts, and change the energy of a room. And in that quiet moment, as the applause continued and the restaurant buzzed with awe and excitement, she realized something profound. This was only the beginning. Her music, which had been a secret for so long, was now a force that could no longer be hidden. She had found her voice, and it was strong, clear, and impossible to ignore. The applause continued to echo through the small restaurant, reverberating off the walls, filling every corner with excitement and amazement. The young waitress finally stood from the piano, her fingers lingering a moment on the keys as if reluctant to leave them. She felt a mixture of exhaustion, exhilaration, and disbelief. Her heart was still racing, her mind trying to take in what had just happened. The quiet, ordinary evening she had expected had transformed into something extraordinary. She had shared her music and the world had noticed. The restaurant owner, who had been standing nearby with wide eyes, finally stepped forward, clapping along with the rest of the patrons. "I didn't know you could do that," he said, his voice a mixture of awe and pride. "I had no idea all these years that you were hiding this. That was incredible." The young waitress offered a modest smile, unsure how to respond. She had never sought attention for her talent, but hearing those words made her feel a warmth she had never experienced before. For years she had been invisible, blending into the background, unnoticed even as she worked tirelessly. Now finally someone had seen her, truly seen her. The group of important guests remained at their table, leaning forward, their faces alight with admiration. One of the men, who had been quiet for most of the evening, finally spoke. "You have an extraordinary gift," he said, his tone sincere. "Many people have skill, but few have this on presence. The way you connect with the listener, the way you breathe life into each note, this is rare." The young waitress felt her cheeks warm. She had never imagined anyone describing her playing in such a way. Most people had only ever seen her as a waitress, someone who served food and cleared tables. Few had ever paused to consider that she had a world inside her, a world filled with music and dreams. Now, in a single evening, that world had been revealed. One of the women at the table, her sharp eyes still wide with wonder, leaned closer. "Do you have any training beyond what you've mentioned?" she asked. "Or is this natural?" The young waitress shook her head slowly. "I've practiced quietly for years," she admitted. "Mostly on my own when no one was watching. I've always loved music, but I never thought anyone would notice." The guests nodded, their expressions filled with respect. "Well, notice we did," one of them said. "And I think the world should too. You should consider sharing your music more often. You have a rare ability to move people." The words hung in the air, sinking deep into her heart. She had always dreamed of being recognized, but never like this. Never so suddenly, never so fully. Even the younger patrons who had been dining quietly were now approaching her. A few spoke softly, their voices full of admiration. "That was amazing," one said. "I've never heard anything like it." Another added, "You should play for more people. You're incredible." She smiled politely, but inside, a sense of validation began to grow. After years of feeling small and unnoticed, she realized that her talent truly mattered, that it could touch lives. The older man who had encouraged her earlier approached once more, this time with a gentle but firm presence. "You have a gift," he said, looking her in the eyes. "Tonight you shared it in a way that will not be forgotten. Remember this feeling, this moment. Let it guide you. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small again. You are capable of far more than you realize." Her hands trembled slightly as she absorbed his words. She had always feared showing her music to anyone, worried about judgment or failure. But tonight all those fears had melted away. For the first time, she felt truly seen, truly recognized, and the effect was intoxicating. She realized that her music was not just a private joy. It was a force that could inspire, move, and connect people. The restaurant owner now approached, his expression shifting from surprise to genuine admiration. "I want to do something for you," he said. "You've given this place a moment that everyone here will remember. I want people to know that you are more than just a waitress. You are a musician. You deserve an opportunity." The young waitress shook her head, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say," she whispered. The owner smiled. "Then let your music speak for you," he said. One of the guests, who had been quietly observing, spoke again. "I run a local concert hall," he said. "We often look for fresh talent to feature. I would like to invite you to perform. It's an opportunity to reach more people, to let your music touch hearts beyond this room." The young waitress's eyes widened. She had never imagined such a thing. For years, she had only dreamed of performing quietly, alone in spaces that mattered little to anyone else. And now, here was a real chance offered sincerely by someone who had the means to make it happen. Her thoughts swirled. She had always felt invisible, a small presence in a busy world. But tonight her music had changed that. People were not only noticing her, they were respecting her, celebrating her, offering her doors that had once seemed closed forever. She realized that her life could be different, that her dreams could become reality, if she was brave enough to accept the opportunities now presenting themselves. The applause continued to die down, but the energy in the room remained. Patrons lingered, speaking quietly among themselves about the extraordinary performance they had witnessed. The young waitress moved to collect plates, but she did so with a newfound sense of confidence. Her hands moved more lightly, her steps felt freer, and her smile was genuine, reflecting the joy that had begun to bloom within her. Even her co-workers approached her cautiously, unsure how to respond to the sudden attention she was receiving. "That was incredible," one said, voice soft. "I had no idea." Another nodded, smiling. "You're amazing." Everyone was talking about it. She thanked them quietly, realizing that for the first time, her colleagues were seeing her as more than just a helper in the restaurant. They were seeing her as someone remarkable. The older man approached once more, his presence steady and reassuring. "This is just the beginning," he said. "Tonight was proof of what you can do. Keep pushing yourself and don't be afraid of what you might achieve. People will notice talent like yours, but only if you let it shine." She nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle deep inside her. For the first time, she understood that her years of quiet practice had prepared her not just for this night, but for everything that could follow. The guests continued to discuss her performance in low tones, clearly impressed. The critic, notebook closed now, leaned back in his chair. He had come expecting a polite display of skill, something charming but unremarkable. Instead, he had witnessed a performance that would stay with him for years. "Talent like that doesn't come around often," he muttered to himself. "And when it does, you remember it forever." The young waitress felt a mixture of relief and exhilaration. She had played not just for herself but for everyone present, and they had responded with admiration and respect. For the first time, she realized that her music had power. It could move hearts, change perceptions, and open doors she had never imagined. She felt a swell of gratitude for the courage that had led her to sit at the piano and play, despite her fears. The evening began to wind down. Guests finished their meals, some lingering to speak with her personally, others offering smiles of silent acknowledgement. The young waitress moved between the tables, accepting compliments and invitations, feeling a new sense of confidence with each interaction. She had been invisible for so long, but tonight she had been impossible to ignore. Her talent had created ripples, small at first but spreading outward, touching everyone in the room. The restaurant owner approached once more, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "You've shown everyone something extraordinary. Don't forget how this feels. It's proof of your potential." She nodded, feeling a deep sense of validation. For years she had worked quietly, unnoticed, her talent hidden from the world. But now, she had been recognized, celebrated, and given a glimpse of the possibilities that awaited her. Even the rain outside seemed to pause, as if acknowledging the transformation that had taken place. The warm glow of the lights inside the restaurant reflected on the wet pavement, creating a quiet sense of magic that matched the evening. The young waitress stood for a moment near the piano, letting herself absorb the attention and admiration. She realized that this was more than just a performance, it was a turning point. Her life could be different from this moment forward. As the guests began to leave, several approached her directly, expressing their admiration and offering encouragement. "You have a rare gift," one said. "Don't waste it. The world needs to hear your music," another added. "You have the power to inspire. Keep playing and doors will open for you." Each word felt like a small flame igniting inside her, a confirmation that her talent was not just real but significant. The older man who had guided her through the evening nodded one last time. "Remember this night," he said. "It's proof that your dreams are valid, that your music matters, that you are capable of incredible things. Don't ever forget it." She smiled, a quiet determination forming in her heart. She would not forget. She would not hide anymore. For the first time, she truly believed in herself. The applause, the admiration, the recognition, it all reinforced what she had always known deep down. She had a gift and it was powerful. Tonight had transformed more than just the evening. The next morning, the young waitress arrived at the restaurant with a quiet anticipation she had never felt before. The memory of last night's performance lingered in her mind, each note, each chord, each reaction from the guests replaying vividly. She had shared her music and had been truly seen. She had felt what it was like to connect, to inspire, to make people feel something profound. The thought filled her with a mixture of excitement and nervousness for what might come next. As she walked into the restaurant, the owner greeted her with a broad smile. "Good morning," he said warmly. "I've already had calls from some of the guests last night. They haven't stopped talking about you and your performance. You've made quite an impression." She smiled a little shyly. It was strange to hear that her simple act of playing the piano had sparked such interest. For years she had kept her music to herself, fearing judgment, fearing failure. Now it seemed the world was curious about her talent. Even before she began her shift, a few of the guests who had returned to the restaurant to grab a cup of coffee or check in on the staff stopped to speak with her. "You were extraordinary last night," one said softly. "I can't stop thinking about it." Another added, "You have a gift that should not be hidden. Promise me you'll play again soon." Each comment made her heart swell. She had always wanted to share her music, but now the encouragement felt different. It was real, tangible, and validating. As the morning passed, she moved through her usual tasks with a lightness she had never felt. Pouring coffee, setting tables, and clearing dishes all felt different now, infused with a quiet pride. Her coworkers, too, had changed in their demeanor. They no longer glanced at her as just another staff member. There was a newfound respect in their eyes. One of them whispered, "She's incredible." "Did you hear the way she played?" Another nodded in agreement. The young waitress smiled softly, feeling the subtle shift in how she was seen. Later that morning, the older man who had encouraged her last night appeared at the restaurant. "Good morning," he said, his tone calm but purposeful. "I wanted to check in. How are you feeling after last night?" She shrugged lightly, though she knew she could not hide the excitement in her chest. "A little overwhelmed," she admitted. "I didn't expect it all to happen so quickly." He nodded knowingly. "It's natural to feel that way. Last night was more than just a performance. It was a turning point. The way people respond to you now, it's a reflection of your talent, yes, but also of your courage to share it." She listened, absorbing his words. Courage had always been difficult for her, even in small ways. She had spent years in the background, quietly practicing, quietly hoping for a chance. Now she realized that courage wasn't just about performing. It was about believing that what she had to offer had value. Last night had proved that. As the day continued, she received an unexpected call. It was the man who ran the local concert hall, the one who had expressed interest in inviting her to perform publicly. His voice was warm and encouraging. "I wanted to follow up after last night," he said. "Your performance was extraordinary. I would be honored if you would consider performing at our hall. It's a small audience, but the chance to play for people who truly appreciate music. I think it could be the beginning of something special." Her heart raced. She had dreamed of opportunities like this in quiet, private ways, but hearing it offered so directly felt surreal. She thought about the hours of practice, the late nights, the solitude she had endured for the love of music, and now someone wanted her to share that gift with a broader audience. I would love that," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you for giving me this chance." The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity and excitement. Patrons continued to stop her to compliment her performance, to encourage her to play more, to share their amazement. She moved through the restaurant with a calm focus, but her mind kept returning to the piano, to the music she had shared, and to the idea of performing for a larger audience. She had never imagined her life taking this turn, and yet, the possibility now seemed tangible, almost within reach. By evening, the restaurant was busy again, but the atmosphere had shifted. People were not just there for the food, they were there to experience something special. Patrons asked if she would play again, and she did, carefully at first, warming up her fingers, letting the music flow naturally. The first few notes were met with smiles and soft applause, and soon she felt the same energy as the night before. The piano became her voice, expressing thoughts and emotions that words could never convey. Throughout the evening, she noticed the subtle ways in which her life was changing. People approached her differently, not just as a waitress, but as someone with talent, presence, and a story worth noticing. Invitations and opportunities began to surface. Small at first, requests to play at community events, local gatherings, and private functions, but each one reinforced a new reality. She could no longer remain hidden. Her music demanded to be shared. The older man approached her once more during a quiet moment. "It's remarkable to watch," he said. "You've taken a single evening and transformed it into a catalyst for change. But remember, the real journey begins now. People will notice, yes, but only you can decide how far you will go with it. Talent is nothing without persistence and belief in yourself." She nodded thoughtfully, realizing the truth in his words. Talent alone had brought her to this point, but it was courage, perseverance, and the willingness to take risks that would carry her forward. For the first time, she felt a sense of agency over her life, a recognition that she could shape her own future. She was no longer just responding to circumstances. She was creating her path. A few weeks later, she found herself preparing for her first public performance at the concert hall. It was a small venue, intimate but filled with people who appreciated music deeply. She spent hours practicing, refining the pieces she would perform, and rehearsing the subtle nuances that would bring the music to life. Her confidence had grown since that first night at the restaurant, but she still felt a quiet nervousness. Every note, every chord, every pause mattered, and she wanted to give her audience an experience as powerful as the one she had created before. The day of the performance arrived, and the energy was electric. People settled into their seats, chatting quietly, unaware of the extraordinary talent about to unfold before them. She took a deep breath, feeling her fingers brush the keys of the piano. The memories of the restaurant, the encouragement of the older man, the admiration of the guests, they all converged into a single moment. She knew she was ready. The first note sounded, soft and deliberate, filling the hall with a gentle warmth. She allowed the music to flow naturally, as she had learned to do, letting each note carry emotion and meaning. The audience responded instantly, drawn into the story she was telling without words. Her fingers moved with confidence and grace, navigating the keys with precision, yet always with feeling. As the performance continued, she felt the same connection she had experienced at the restaurant, only magnified. The room seemed alive with the music, every listener responding in their own way. Some closed their eyes, letting themselves be carried. Others leaned forward, fully absorbed. Each note became a thread, weaving together a shared experience of beauty and emotion. By the end of the performance, the audience was on their feet, applauding and cheering. She rose from the piano, breathless and exhilarated. For the first time, she understood fully what it meant to share her talent and have it recognized on a larger scale. She had moved beyond the restaurant, beyond the quiet practice rooms, and into a space where her music could truly impact others. After the performance, she was approached by organizers, fellow musicians, and audience members, all offering praise, encouragement, and opportunities. Invitations to perform elsewhere, collaborations, and requests for lessons filled her evening. She realized that the night at the restaurant had been the turning point, the catalyst that had opened doors she had never imagined. As she walked home that night, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Her journey had begun with quiet dedication, hidden practice, and years of dreaming. But it had now reached a point where the world was beginning to notice. She understood that this was only the beginning of her path, that there would be challenges and obstacles ahead. But for the first time, she felt capable of meeting them. She thought back to the restaurant, to the first night she had dared to play in front of an audience. It seemed like a lifetime ago, yet it was still vivid in her memory. That night had taught her courage, the power of self-belief, and the importance of sharing what makes one unique. It had shown her that even a small action, sitting at a piano and letting music flow, could transform a life. And as she lay down that night, the piano still echoing softly in her mind, she felt a quiet joy. Her life had changed, and she knew that more change was yet to come. She had discovered not only her talent, but also her voice, her courage, and the limitless possibilities that awaited her. The young waitress, who had once been invisible, had become a musician whose music could inspire, touch hearts, and change the world, one note at a time.